Shigeru was an ugly loser who lost his job and his will to live after a girl falsely accused him of being a molester. But when he gets the chance to go to another world, he sacrifices his looks and the ability to touch girls in exchange for absolute power that turns him into a god. Shigeru was always ugly, but he was never a bad person. He was just an ordinary office worker who never let his looks get in the way of his work ethic or his desire to live a decent life. He treated everyone with respect and led a modest social life. Everything changed when a woman falsely accused him of touching her on a train. No one believed him, just because of his appearance, and the case ended up going to court. To put an end to the matter quickly, Shigeru pleaded guilty and paid a small fine, thinking that would spare him further trouble. However, his plan backfired. He was fired for being a convicted molester. Years later, the woman was arrested for running scams, and it was discovered that she made up accusations against men she considered ugly. This wasn't motivated by money, but by pure contempt. Shigeru was furious, but there was nothing he could do, as the trauma from the situation destroyed him inside. He lost his self-confidence, couldn't find another job, and gradually became an unemployed recluse. He spent all his savings, even his parents' money, living a life without purpose. One day, while reading an article about mysterious disappearances in his area, he wished he could vanish too. In the comments section of the news story, he finds the account of a man who claims to have visited another world. This man says he made mistakes when distributing his attribute points at the beginning, and because of that, he had to return to Earth, sacrificing half of his life. Shigeru thinks it's all absurd, but his despair is so deep that he decides to follow the instructions left behind. He stands in front of the window with his arms raised, and when the clock strikes the right time, his laptop screen changes on its own, asking if he wants to start a new life. He thinks it's a virus, but decides to play along and clicks next. The next screen shows that in this new life, he would be 16 years old and could adjust the points he would allocate to his appearance. Since he was always considered ugly, he lowers his beauty value from 5 to 255, which gives him an absurd amount of bonus points. He discovers that the more negative traits he chooses for himself, the more stat points he gains. So he starts adding extreme penalties, like losing 10% of his HP every time he touches a girl or having his income reduced by 10%. Finally, he writes that if he loses his virginity, he will die immediately, which earns him 100 trillion bonus points. But before he can allocate these points, time runs out and he is transported to another world. When he wakes up, Shigeru realizes he's even uglier than before and, to make matters worse, now weighs twice as much as the average American. Other people appear in the same place, including two girls wearing only their underwear. A handsome guy takes off his shirt and offers it to one of the girls who is shivering from the cold. Trying to be a gentleman, Shigeru does the same, but the other girl refuses, saying she doesn't want anything used by an ugly fat guy. The handsome guy introduces himself as Seiji, the blonde girl doesn't say her name, and the second girl introduces herself as Saika. They're all 16 years old and find it hard to believe that Shigeru is the same age as them. Seiji takes the lead and confirms that everyone arrived in that world using the same method. While they're talking, Shigeru searches the room, since he's not there to make friends. He opens a drawer and finds a gold coin, but it disappears as soon as he touches it. He realizes this happened because of the income penalty he chose and decides not to worry about it. Soon after, Seiji shows up and suggests that he and Shigeru look for resources together. They find several weapons, clothes, and a few more coins. Shigeru thinks the small clothes wouldn't fit him, but then realizes they're magical and adjust to each person's body. The girls decide to split the coins, but there are only 7 and 8 people in the group. They accuse Shigeru of having taken one of them, and he admits they're right. To avoid conflict, he decides to let them keep all the coins. Even though Seiji says that's unfair, Saika insists that he didn't help find anything, so he doesn't deserve anything. Shigeru is already starting to despise Saika, but decides to ignore her and talk to Seiji, offering him the coins in exchange for an axe. Saika opposes the idea, and Seiji himself says he can't make decisions on his own. He reveals that in his past life he was selfish and had trouble communicating, and now he's trying to change. He also notes that Shigeru seems to have his own issues and should try to overcome them. In the end, they decide to split the weapons by playing rock, paper, scissors. Shigeru loses to everyone and ends up with only the wooden club as a weapon. Seiji suggests that everyone shake hands to mark the start of their adventure, but Shigeru refuses, saying he doesn't want to take any risks this time. Soon after, they find a map and decide to head to the nearest town. But as soon as they open the door, they come face to face with a small goblin ready to attack them. Seiji acts quickly and kills the goblin with a single blow. However, he soon realizes that more goblins are approaching. He takes the lead and asks the unnamed blonde to support him on the front line, while Saika tries to ready her bow for the fight. He puts Shigeru in charge of protecting Saika in the meantime, and then goes off to defeat the goblins one by one. However, Saika is a complete beginner who can't even string a bow properly. While Shigeru watches her with judgment, a goblin attacks him from behind. He tries to take it down with a single blow, but realizes he's incredibly weak. The little goblin manages to push him back with ease. That's when Shigeru understands the reason. He didn't have time to allocate his stat points. Even so, he decides to fight with his current stats and manages to defeat the goblin with his next strike. Suddenly, a status window pops up in front of him, and when he sees that just killing a goblin makes him reach level 32, he realizes that the 10% experience bonus is working. Seiji and the blonde also level up and allocate their points to strength and endurance. Shigeru notices that the others can't see his system window, so he decides to put 1,000,000,000 points into each of his attributes, at least for now. As soon as he does this, his interface starts glitching and a golden light envelopes him. He wonders what's going on, until the system reveals that his class has been determined. He is now the Almighty God. Shigeru doesn't really understand what that means, but he's interrupted when another goblin starts attacking him. However, the monster's blows don't cause any damage. Curious to test his strength, he flicks the goblin, which goes flying all the way to the stratosphere. No one else sees what happened and they just think it was a gust of wind. Seiji and the blonde keep hunting goblins, while Saika is still struggling to ready her bow. She starts to cry quietly, and Shigeru feels sorry for her. To help her without hurting her pride, he pretends to be a bow fanatic and says he urgently needs to string one. The trick works and Saika hands him the bow. With 1,000,000,000 points in dexterity, he strings it in a single motion. Saika is impressed and asks him to shoot an arrow as thanks. Shigeru decides to test one of the skills he got with his class and chooses Thunder Arrow. But instead of hitting a goblin, the arrow shoots up into the sky. Shigeru wonders if his aim is really that bad. Then, a huge magic circle appears in the sky and a majestic thunder dragon descends onto the field, wiping out all the goblins with a single attack. Everyone is shocked by what they see, but Shigeru just says he was part of the archery club, and that they learned that kind of technique there. Saika believes his lie again and decides to join the battle, but starts shooting arrows randomly, without aiming. Seiji and the blonde decide to take care of the remaining goblins, while Saika soon runs out of arrows. Sad and disappointed with her own uselessness, she curls up. Shigeru helps her again, turning a branch into more arrows with one of his abilities, and also points out that there are items scattered on the ground. Saika gets excited when she finds them, but ends up wasting them all. Meanwhile, the other two finish off the remaining goblins. Some time later, the group arrives in the city. Everyone rushes off to get something to eat, but Shigeru decides to keep his distance, believing that an ugly loser like him should walk alone. He sits down near a fountain and realizes that he's hungry too. At that moment, a cat appears, and he almost pets it, but stops, afraid it might be female and that this could cost him a 10% penalty to his HP. Then, Saika suddenly shows up, and Shigeru gets so startled that he falls into the water. When he gets out, Saika hands him a hamburger, saying she knew he was out of money and wanted to thank him for his earlier help. Shigeru starts to see her in a more positive light and accepts the hamburger. However, when their fingers accidentally touch, he gets such a powerful shock that he throws the snack far away. The system indicates that he took 58 trillion damage, enough to destroy the world 300 times. But the biggest problem is that Saika gets upset, thinking he threw the hamburger away on purpose. However, Shigeru regains his old salesman charm and says he got startled because she's just too pretty. He says he still wants to eat the snack she bought for him. Saika replies that the other one is dirty now and offers him the hamburger she was going to eat herself, as a way of showing gratitude. Shigeru accepts. While he's eating, Seiji and the blonde find them, and Shigeru decides he'll stick with the group at least until he can pay Saika back for the hamburger. Right after that, Saika goes to a shop to buy more arrows, since she ran out so quickly. She insists with the shopkeeper, saying she has enough money to pay for more, but the man says her bag is already full. Shigeru goes with her and would like to help, but he can't reveal that he can make arrows whenever he wants. Saika then asks if he's not going to buy anything, and before he can even answer, she figures out herself that he can't buy anything because he's out of money. When they leave the shop, Seiji and the low-level assistant return after finding a good inn for them to spend the night. Shigeru says he'll sleep in the park because, obviously, he can't afford to pay, but Saika insists that she'll pay for his room. Shigeru tries to refuse, saying there's no need, but Saika argues that he just doesn't want to accept help from a girl, grabs his hand, and drags him to the inn. Since she touched him through his clothes, he didn't take any damage. Later that night, Shigeru thinks that he can't stay there for too long, since he'll end up owing even more to Saika and the others. He decides to find a way to make money, even with the system's limitation that reduces his earnings to 1,000. Suddenly, he gets an idea. The next day, Seiji and the others wake up and find a bunch of cookies and food on the table. Shigeru calls them over to eat with him, saying he won't be able to finish all the food by himself. They wonder how he managed to get so much food without any money. Shigeru explains that he used a technique to make people want to give him something in return, but in reality, he just used branches to make arrows and traded them for food through the barter system, without using any money. Saika says he doesn't need to beg just because he's out of money, since she can help him whenever he wants. But Shigeru believes he's already repaid his debt to her and doesn't need to stick around anymore. When they finish eating, Seiji grabs the map and says they need to start taking on quests to earn money. He realized that the monsters they fought the day before didn't drop any money or items, so he wants to explore a nearby cave. Shigeru is impressed by Seiji's decisiveness, when suddenly a rugged man appears, saying he can guide them to the cave. He introduces himself as Kaoshiru and claims to be a reincarnate like them. When he sees Shigeru's face, he's a bit startled, but quickly asks if they're all newcomers here. Seiji stands up to talk to him, still suspicious, and Kaoshiru pulls some green cards out of his pocket, saying they're items found in the first cabin and that they allow for a full discount at the inn one time. Saika panics when she hears this, since they didn't find those cards. Kaoshiru reassures her, saying she can still get a refund if she shows the cards now. He hands them over and Saika accepts them immediately, to Seiji's surprise, who still doesn't fully trust Kaoshiru. Shigeru feels the same way, suspecting that Kaoshiru isn't just a guide, but someone who takes advantage of newcomers. Even so, he believes he can handle things if something goes wrong and decides to let Seiji make the decision. Seiji weighs the pros and cons and ends up hiring Kaoshiru as a guide, since they need information and ways to level up quickly. So, Kaoshiru leads them to the cave, where they are soon attacked by a group of goblins. Saika immediately starts firing arrows, but none of them hit. Shigeru is disappointed, and Kaoshiru tells Saika to imagine that each arrow is worth 1,000,000 yen before shooting. Although she's proud of her wealth, imagining such a high cost makes Saika focus more, and she manages to take down a goblin with a precise shot. They move forward, and Shigeru is surprised by how competent Kaoshiru is as a guide. After that, Kaoshiru gives everyone guidance on how to use their weapons better, but Saika goes back to her old habit of shooting arrows randomly. Koshiro asks Shigeru if he's not going to practice, but he replies that at the moment he doesn't have any suitable skills. Koshiro understands that it's hard to level up with a staff as a weapon, but encourages him by saying that the staff's ultimate skill is really amazing. Shigeru already knows this because, when he went to the forest to make arrows, he encountered a giant orc and tried to use his most powerful skill. However, the system warned him that if he used that skill, everything within a 200-kilometer radius would be destroyed and more than 1.5 million people would die. He immediately cancelled the attack. Koshiro encourages him to be more active on the battlefield, or else he'll end up having to retire, just like he did. He then starts telling how he used to be part of a group of mercenaries, but while the leader became king, he ended up being left behind and had to retire. He praises the king, saying he's at level 80 with all attributes above 160, but that seems extremely weak to Shigeru. Finally, they arrive at the cave, which looks more like ancient ruins, and everyone gets excited to explore it, except for Saika, who is scared. However, once inside, she becomes interested in the limestone stalactites and starts throwing a tantrum when Koshiro tells her to stay away, saying they're dangerous. Shigeru wonders if Saika is really a child, while Seiji questions her in a more reasonable way. He starts by revealing that he was 30 years old in the other world, and then Saika mentions that she's 17 in real life and is getting ready to enter college. While Seiji starts talking to her about her studies, Shigeru realizes that Saika is actually quite smart, at least academically. Next, they face some bat monsters and reach the boss room, where Saika finally learns that she needs to think before acting. Koshiro warns her that if she enters that room the way she is now, she'll die instantly, and Saika ends up backing off. Seiji decides to call it a day and thanks Koshiro for the help. In turn, Koshiro says that Seiji has the potential to be a great leader. However, before they leave, Koshiro suggests a special event for the newcomers and takes them to a conference room to throw a party. He explains that another summoned person created that safe space where monsters and magic can't get in, and inside there are French fries and sodas. Shigeru immediately uses his poison detection skill and discovers that the rims of the cans are laced with a sleeping drug. Fortunately, Seiji is cautious and refuses the drink. However, when Koshiro pretends to be sad and offended, Seiji feels bad for doubting him and agrees to join the celebration. Shigeru is quietly disappointed by Seiji's kindness. Everyone starts eating and drinking, and Shigeru decides to entertain them with conversation while secretly casting antidote magic on them. He asks what each of them did before coming to that world, and the mood in the room changes completely. Shigeru soon realizes that everyone there was running away from their previous lives, including himself. But Seiji decides to open up a little about his past. He says that he dropped out of school out of boredom and started his own company, called Success Life. Shigeru remembers that one day he went to that company to give a sales presentation and the CEO looked a lot like Seiji, and Seiji recognizes him too, since that salesman left a deep impression on him. He says that, without making an appointment, the salesman tried to sell him an extremely expensive copier. Seiji tried to negotiate, but the salesman said he would make him smile and never let him down. He also told him to relax because he was the CEO. Inspired by those words, Seiji allowed his employees to run the company on their own. Luckily, the company prospered, but later Seiji decided to replace the employees with artificial intelligence, which led the business to bankruptcy. This left him feeling depressed, thinking he had wasted the opportunity given by the salesman. That's why, when he was summoned, he promised he would never let anyone down again. Suddenly, he reveals that the salesman's name was Shigeru, but our chubby guy pretends it wasn't him. Right after, everyone falls asleep because of the poison and Koshiro brings his gang to capture them. However, Shigeru is only pretending to sleep, waiting for the right moment to act. The bandits start handcuffing everyone, and just as Shigeru is about to react, Seiji stands up and tells them not to touch his companions. Koshiro doesn't take it seriously, since he knows Seiji can barely stand, and orders his men to keep working. Shigeru can't use his attacks directly because he doesn't want Seiji to get caught in the middle of the fight. Fortunately, Seiji tries to fight back, but he's thrown against the wall. Kayashiro orders them not to hurt the merchandise, since that would lower its value. Seiji gets furious when he hears this and yells that everyone there had already been broken by life, and that when they get a second chance, people like Kayashiro try to destroy them again. Kayashiro tells him to save the sermon and orders his men to take him away. At that moment, Shigeru decides to step in. He jumps on the thugs, crushing them with his weight, without using any attack attributes. He tells Seiji to run away with the girls, but Seiji refuses to leave him alone in danger. He faces the thugs, saying he can defeat them with a single blow, which everyone thinks is just bravado. When the thugs charge, Shigeru intercepts their attacks, jumping from side to side and crushing them with his weight. Kayashiro orders his men to deal with the bouncing pig first, but Seiji asks Shigeru to run away and leave this to him. The thugs attack Shigeru without causing much harm, until one of them sticks his fingers up his nose. At that moment, a bright light begins to shine from Seiji's hand, and he warns the thugs to back off before his light of truth pierces their evil hearts. They get scared and ask what kind of ability that is. Seiji explains that he wrote a vow in his special notebook, promising never to abandon his friends, and that if he ever did, he would pay the price. Because of that, he received a lot of bonus points and invested them in a special ability that activates when he gets angry. He warns the thugs that this is their last chance to run, but Kayashiro says he'll rip off his hand before he can attack. Shigeru decides to see what Seiji's ability can do and steps in as a shield, saying they need to work together because they're at a disadvantage. Seiji then uses his ability and transforms into a form that not even Goku has reached yet, promising that the thugs will pay for their sins. Seiji goes into an awkward monologue that nobody wants to hear, saying that his inner screams awakened another persona that had been dormant inside him. And now that this persona is awake, his third eye has also been awakened. Now, as the winged and cringe hero Aldine, he's ready to fight his first battle as the protagonist. Meanwhile, Shigeru watches everything from the sidelines, only able to wonder what the hell is going on. Like any cliché anime protagonist, Seiji announces the move he's about to use, but Koshiro and his gang of mercenaries have no idea how to react, since they don't know any of Seiji's moves. Even so, for some reason, Seiji stops his attack halfway through, leaving everyone confused about what his plan is. Kayashiro asks Seiji why, and he replies that it's up to the law to judge a criminal, not him, and that's why he held back, even though he had the power to carry out justice right then and there. He says he's giving everyone one more chance at redemption. Seiji asks Kayashiro to repent for his sins by turning himself into justice. Honestly, this guy is a complete idiot, and even the ugliest crook gets that. Kayashiro pretends to surrender, and when Seiji falls for the lie and lets his guard down, Kayashiro attacks him. Luckily, Shigeru jumps in with his pig-like reflexes and starts getting beaten up by everyone for not keeping his fat butt out of the fight. Obviously, Shigeru doesn't feel a thing and starts picking his nose. Then he flicks the booger without anyone noticing, breaking a wall. Before anyone can figure out what happened, Shigeru blames Seiji for it. And seeing how destructive Seiji's powers can be, Kayashiro and his men actually give up this time. Kayashiro starts crying, promising that he and his gang will never hurt anyone again and that they'll turn themselves into the law. Shigeru joins in on the embarrassment and makes everyone line up. Then he tells Seiji, now Aldini, to whip them with the whip of love, justifying it by saying they need to feel the pain and suffering of the people. But Aldini turns back into Seiji once he loses his anger. Besides, he doesn't want to use the whip of love while he's angry. He says he wants to remember the hand that strikes the mercenary and the pain they will feel, claiming that this is true love, and then starts slapping each of them in the face. After that, he carries the still sleeping girls to bed, doing everything by himself since Shigeru can't touch women. This hard work makes Seiji faint, and the mercenaries, who supposedly had repented, are already ready to steal again. Since Shigeru is useful as a human shield, Kayashiro tries to recruit him for the gang, promising that he would get girls for him. However, Shigeru has no intention whatsoever of joining them. And now that all his companions have fainted, he can unleash his full power, breaking his chains. First, he covers Seiji with a blanket, trying to look heroic, but the mercenaries aren't buying it, asking, how can the ugliest guy in anime history be a hero? In any case, Shigeru beats them all up. But the animators probably didn't have the budget to show the action scene, so the anime cuts straight to the moment when Shigeru and the others already have a lot of money for turning in the mercenaries. Seiji wants the girls to get a share of the money, even though all they did was sleep. He says they should consider the money as compensation, since he put everyone at risk by trusting someone he shouldn't have. But the girls tell him not to blame himself, since he was amazing in his other persona. They ask if Shigeru was awake too, and Seiji answers for him, saying that Shigeru bravely used his body to protect him during the fight. Since Shigeru did so much despite being so useless, Seiji thinks he should get a share too, but Shigeru immediately refuses, saying that if he takes any money, it will basically reduce him to nothing. Anyway, he plans to leave the group as soon as he pays Saika, and uses the moment to do so, asking Seiji to let Saika carry his share of the money, making up some excuse that nobody cares about. Saika agrees and offers to carry everyone's money, saying she'll take good care of it. But realistically, she'll probably spend it all on shopping and other frivolous things. In the end, only Shigeru hands over his share of the money to Saika. Saika, happy, takes Shigeru to a diner to buy him a snack with his own money. Now that his debts are paid off, Shigeru decides to leave the group after lunch. While they're eating burgers together, Saika wonders what Shigeru's status menu looks like, and he lies, saying his stats are pretty weak. Saika thinks it's a shame that Shigeru didn't know about this earlier and reveals that, before reincarnating there, she discovered that if you lower your appearance points, you get bonus points that you can use to boost your stats. Apparently, Saika allocated 16 points to her appearance, which makes Shigeru wonder how much prettier she would be if she had kept her beauty points higher. Saika notices Shigeru staring at her face and asks if he thinks she's pretty. When he agrees, she reveals that she wrote on a special note, asking to be beautiful, and because of that, her appearance points were overwritten. Shigeru doesn't believe that's possible and immediately regrets it. A cat catches Saika's attention, but she hesitates to approach, revealing that she had never done it before because she couldn't walk. She almost trips and Shigeru, trying to act like a hero, dives in front of her. To his embarrassment, she doesn't fall and asks what he's doing. He replies that he was exercising to balance out the calories he ate, but everyone, including Saika, knows that's not true. Ignoring his presence, she goes over to the cat and pets it, while Shigeru walks away, saying he needs to go to the bathroom. In the bathroom, Shigeru thinks about Saika with tears in his eyes. He reflects on the kind of life she must have had in her previous existence. She had talked about being beautiful and, instead of touching her own face, she touched her hands. To make matters worse, she stood up and said that now she could walk. Thinking about this, he comes to the conclusion that she was either physically disabled or socially withdrawn in her past life. Both possibilities make him feel bad, because he believes she deserves much more than that. Spending too much time in the bathroom, Saika starts to worry and knocks on the door, asking if he has a stomachache and if he needs any medicine. This makes him reflect even more on her kindness. He wonders if there aren't any gods in that world who could give her the good life she deserves. Then, he remembers that he possesses absolute divine abilities. He is also a god. Therefore, he can change her reality and make sure that this time she has a worthy life. He decides to help her, wipes his eyes, and goes to meet her. When they meet, Saika says that the others are waiting for them. Shigeru decides to stay a little longer because of her. When they gather with the others, Seiji states that since they're forming a group, everyone needs to have responsibilities. Shigeru wasn't even interested in the idea of a group, but doesn't think it's a bad idea and stays to see what Seiji decides. Seiji declares that he will be the hero. He assigns the role of mage to Saika and asks if Shigeru will be the Epicfighter. Shigaru doesn't want any role. He suggests that Saika take the position of Epicfighter, but she refuses. She also wants to be the heroine, exactly the same role as Seiji. Seiji refuses to give up the position. So, Shigaru offers Saika the role of Epicfighter, but she keeps insisting on the title of heroine, until eventually everyone just moves on. Each one receives costumes appropriate to their role, and Shigaru notes that Seiji is very well prepared as a hero, with fitting clothes and accessories. Saika, on the other hand, even dressed as a mage, adorns herself as if she were the heroine, never giving up on her wish. In the end, the group consists of a hunter, a hero, a mage, and an epic fighter. Seiji then informs them about the new mission. They are going to the Principality of Valyria. However, he sets a rule: no one can spend more than 3 Ri on snacks. This leaves Saika discouraged, since it means she won't be able to buy the snacks she wanted. After the meeting ends, Saika approaches the other girl in the group and tries to talk to her for the first time, which makes Shigaru happy to see her trying to be more sociable. Saika asks if the girl wants to play jump rope, and the girl agrees, going off to change her clothes. While she's away, Shigaru remembers the moment when Saika decided to buy a jump rope instead of a weapon, even after looking at all the options. She simply fell in love with the rope as soon as she saw it, and the seller, thinking she was a kung fu fighter, warned her to be careful with the item. After that, Shigaru asked if she knew how to use the rope, and upon hearing that she didn't, decided to teach her. He took her to a safe place and showed her how to jump. He jumped high, surprising her with his lightness. When he asked her to try, she did, and when she finished, she said she felt perfect. She also said that she wanted to talk to the other girl and learn to jump with her, since she didn't even know her name and wanted to become her friend. Shigaru thought it was a good idea and encouraged her. That's why they were there now. He hides and watches the two of them jump rope. When Saika finishes, she hands the rope to the other girl and asks her name. The girl turns completely red, and Saika realizes she doesn't want to say her name, which is understandable, since everyone came from that world to escape their old lives. So, Saika gives her a new name, Leeds. The girl beams, jumps really high, and catches everyone's attention. Leeds jumps so high that Shigaru wonders what her power is. He remembers that she didn't get hurt in the previous fight. The villagers get excited when they see her fly and invite her to join several groups. Enchanted by her sudden fame, Leeds completely forgets about Saika. Saika calls her several times, and when she doesn't get a response, she starts to cry. Shigaru goes to comfort her, but the villagers call him ugly and threaten to call security. Leeds then runs over to Saika, saying that they're part of the same group. She comes closer, and Shigaru scolds her for not answering the cute girl who was calling her. After they return home, Saika calms down and finds a letter from Leeds apologizing for having ignored her. After Saika leaves, Leeds goes to Shigaru, takes him to a room, and bows as an apology. When Shigaru asks why, she reveals that she knows he is Mr. Y. But how did she find out?